Okay, let's hope this works. Last video, I had no audio. Come on, people. When I have no audio, tell me I have no audio, okay? It's not your fault. It's my fault. I think the microphone got muted somehow, but I move it around a little bit when I'm working here, so I may have bumped the button or somebody may have bumped the button. But anyway, here we are. The IPCC process is dead. What does that mean? Last week I did a video on it'd be nice if the YouTube thing gave us some feedback. I'm just going to have to assume this is working. So last week I did a video called Witch Hunt where I mentioned that the Trump administration is going to go after the funding for climate science research and climate scientists. And I said, okay, that's a fishing expedition. They're not going to find any fraud, but they're going to use it as an opportunity to do like what they did during the Salem witch trials. You know, it's like, we're going to go after you. So for us to not go after you, you have to point to somebody else that we could go after instead. So that's what the Salem witch trials was about. And they got, I don't know, what, 25, 27 people they were able to kill before someone finally said, yeah, knock that shit off. And it was the governor of the region. This was a long time ago, right? Governor then didn't mean what it means now. And the witch hunters finally got to his, people kept pointing fingers up the chain until they finally got to the governor's wife and said, thou art a witch, burn. And the governor's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. We're shutting you down. Witchcraft is not a thing. You can't just go after people and burn them at the stake or hang them over an oak tree or whatever you want to do. You're finished. You're done. And so that was when it ended. It didn't end because they realized maybe this witchcraft thing is not even real. But when they got to the governor's wife, the governor shut it down. Of course, he wasn't shutting it down in advance. He only shut it down when it came to his family. So the Trump administration is now doing a witch hunt looking for fraud. Not going to find it because it's not there any more than witchcraft is there. But he's going to go after people to find fraud, and he's going to shut them down. I don't think he's going to hang them, not like they did in Salem. Probably not. Can't rule it out because that's one way to get what you want. But eventually people will stop doing climate research and stop taking money for climate research because it's just too much of a hassle. Well, this week we find out, and it was a CNN article, and now I can't find it. I had it for the last video, but now I can't find it. Doesn't matter. You can find it yourself. So CNN is sharing information they got that the Trump administration is now telling government climate scientists, and there's a lot of those, right? NOAA, NASA, I don't even know where all these people are. Government grants to universities probably counts, right? So anybody who's working on the government dime, including probably grants to universities, you can't participate in the IPCC process. And they're doing it now because right now the IPCC committee is gearing up for their next report. It takes about 2 or 3 years to do all the summary of all the science, and then they issue their report. So they're getting ahead of, they're getting the work started now, even though the report won't be out for a couple of years. So the Trump administration is telling government scientists, no, you're paid by the government and you can't volunteer to work on this committee. You can't work with the IPCC. So what does the IPCC do? It stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the idea was back in 1990, well, that was when the first report came out, but let's say 1985. The governments of the world were concerned that they didn't understand what was happening with the global climate. They knew there was a problem back then. James Hansen, leading climate scientist, had given testimony to Congress. So it wasn't like they didn't know there was a train wreck coming. And so they said, look, rather than every government trying to figure this out for themselves and what they have to do, let's have an intergovernmental panel on climate change. And we'll coordinate the analysis of all the research. And there's tens of thousands of papers that get published over the time period when the report is going to be relevant, like 6 or 7 years. They look back about that far. And so there's going to be tens of thousands of reports. We're going to need thousands of scientists to summarize all this data and to come up with recommendations for policymakers. And policymakers, of course, the politicians, and they don't know squat. policymakers are just Joe Schmo, right? They got a bachelor's degree in education or something, and they used to be a dog catcher or whatever, and they ran for office because they got straight teeth and nice hair or whatever, then they got elected. They have no special qualifications to be writing policy for climate change. So the whole thing about the IPCC report is that they would look at all the data for the last 6 or 7 years. They would summarize it to make sense out of it, because someone has to do that. And then the next layer up, they would publish a 1 or 2 page summary of what policymakers should be worried about and what they should do. And it was out of that process that we got, for example, the Paris Climate Accords. It was 5 years of these reports since 1990, 5 years of reports. And someone probably said, look, we've had 5 years of recommendations for policymakers, and what have we done? Squat. So maybe we should try and do something. So they came up with the Paris Climate Accords. And that was kind of BS. It's nothing in there. You don't have to do anything. It's just a recommendation that you make recommendations. It's a recommendation to policymakers that you recommend something that you're going to do, maybe voluntarily. And the nations didn't do much with that. Some took it seriously. Some said, okay, fine, we'll come up with things we could do to address global heating and climate change. But it's all voluntary. And, the next prime minister may change his or her mind, and it takes funding, and we have to pass funding, and we haven't done that yet. And, so they did nothing. Well, now we're getting ready for the next iteration of this. I think we're up to AR7. So the next report should be the 7th in this series. And what I said in my last video, Witch Hunt, is that there might be one more IPCC report, maybe. It's going to happen during the Trump administration, so I'm not sure they're going to allow that. But in any case, there won't be another one after that. The IPCC process is now officially dead. That's why I said last week. Well, as of today, yes, in fact, it is factually dead. The government scientists are not going to be able to participate in this report. That means they're not going to be able to add their expertise. They're not going to be able to inform the discussion. They're not going to be able to help write the summary for policymakers. They're not going to be able to help write any code to run any summaries of all the data. They're not going to be able to do data searches. They're not going to be able to analyze the data. They're not going to be able to weigh in on any of these discussions. And there's like 4 subcommittees in the IPCC, and they're not going to be on any of the subcommittees. And that's it. It's done. And as you can imagine, the U.S. probably is the biggest player in the IPCC process. We've got the most money. We spend the most money on satellite telemetry. We have all the data that came from the Mauna Loa atmospheric monitoring station. We send all the scientists to Greenland and to Antarctica, and we do core samples, and we have all this ice data. We're not going to do any of that. And my guess is that pretty soon, when we know who all the climate scientists are, and we got all their names, and we have all the places they work, Elon Musk, who is Donald Trump's attack dog, he's going to go in there and pull their funding, zero out their jobs, put them on extended leave, and then fire them. And so there's not going to be any climate scientists working in the U.S. So there won't be anybody to participate in the IPCC process. What a shame. So the IPCC process as of today is done. It's done. We're not participating anymore. They only happen every 6 years or so anyway. So, right. The current IPCC report would be coming out in the Trump administration, and we've just basically knocked the rug out from under that. And I don't think there'll be another one after that. I think the whole process will come to an end. Donald Trump will be running around the planet, or sending his Elon Musks, wherever those people happen to be, around the planet to make other countries also drop their climate research data, because we don't want any anywhere. And that's it. We won't put any more satellites up. We won't repair any satellites that need to be repaired. We won't share the data. We won't download the data. We'll deorbit the satellites. And this will all happen during the Trump administration. And anybody who comes along later, say 10, 20 years from now, who would like to start that back up, they're going to have to start from zero. They're going to have to hire all new scientists. They're going to have to hire all new engineers to build satellites. It's all going to have to start from scratch, and it won't. Because by the time we don't have a Trump monarchy, that'll be, 20 years from now? And 20 years from now, we're all up shit's creek without a paddle. That's what's happening 20 years from now. So the IPCC process is done. There might be another report. It'll be done without U.S. help or participation. It will be half-assed, and no one in the U.S. will report on it. The media won't report on it. It'll be illegal. If you are in the U.S. and you're reporting on the IPCC, you're going to have your broadcast license pulled because it's a hoax. So that's that. Now, the IPCC report process and the recommendations for policymakers, none of that stuff mattered. It really didn't. Nothing was changing. There was no climate action taking place. Whatever climate action is, somebody really needs to explain that to me because I have no idea what you're talking about. You're dealing with physics, okay? If you were jumping out of an airplane, you'd have to have a parachute, okay? And not because that's my recommendation, but because of physics, okay? And so, we're messing around with the Earth dynamic system. We're screwing around with physics. We need to address that. We need to address physics. And taking policy or climate action is not dealing with physics. You don't deal with physics, and you don't jump out of an airplane without a parachute, okay? Because of physics. So we have completely screwed up the Earth dynamic system. Physics. And there's no climate action you can take that's going to change physics. Now, maybe, possibly, you could do something to stop it from getting worse, but not necessarily. And by that, I mean, you could actually do something. You could even say, leave fossil fuels in the ground. You could just stop burning fossil fuels, which would be the end of the world. But you could say that, and maybe you could even do that. Maybe we have World War III, right? And all the oil fields were blown to rat shit, and no one could deliver oil. And so there was no fossil fuels. You could even have that happen. And would that save you from climate change? Global heating? No, it wouldn't, because of physics. So it doesn't matter that the IPCC process is done, finished, never going to happen, never will happen again. We will never recreate it. Doesn't matter, because it wasn't doing us any good anyway. Because the only thing that does you any good in this scenario is that you stop burning fossil fuels. And you're not going to do that. Because you can't. Because if you do, you die. And if you stop burning fossil fuels, that's not enough. Everyone else has to stop burning fossil fuels. Who's burning fossil fuels on your behalf? So the Whole Foods market that gets all these semi trucks delivering food and goods, they have to stop burning fossil fuels too. So that means they can't have all these 18-wheelers pulling up at 3 o'clock in the morning, unloading food into the market. So you go down to the market, and what's on the shelves? Some canned goods, some stuff that got left behind, but they haven't had any deliveries for a week or two, and the store is done. And your electricity comes from fossil fuels, probably natural gas, coal, some combination of those things. So all that stuff has to stop. And even the employees that have to go to the nuclear power plant to generate electricity for you, they have to get there in a car on a freeway using gasoline. And they can't do that because we've given up on fossil fuels. So the nuclear power plant gets shut down. And the water deliveries, that's some water treatment plant. And the employees go there on their cars every morning to monitor the water treatment and replace the filters and get the things out the way and fill up the pipelines with water. And they're not going to do that because no fossil fuels. So you don't get water delivery to your home, and you don't get electricity delivery to your home, and you don't get food deliveries to your neighborhood, and you don't have gasoline to go anywhere else, and you can't save yourself, and there's no fossil fuels. And so you die. So even if we do the thing we have to do, which is stop burning fossil fuels to take climate action, I mean, there you go. There's one for you. There's a climate action for you. Stop burning fossil fuels. If we did that and we didn't make climate change worse, maybe we didn't, well, then you wouldn't have any of the services of modernity to keep you alive. And you die from that, which also is climate action. Let's just remind ourselves. There's lots of ways to take climate action, and they're all bad. Because that's what it takes. Bad things have to happen. So the U.S. is not participating in the IPCC reporting process. God only knows what that means in the long run. I guess it means we don't have any numbers. We don't know how bad it is, and it's going to get bad. It's already bad enough. God, how much worse does it have to get before you just realize it's just bad? You don't need the IPCC report. and the summary for policymakers to tell you that it's bad. You know that. For some people, it's almost unsurvivable. So there's your data. That's all you're going to get. The weather. And I don't mean the weather reporting, because your meteorologist doesn't know fuck all about this. You're going to just stick your head out and you're going to say, wow, it's too hot to breathe. Yep. That's your data. That's all you're going to get. There's not going to be any summary for policymakers. There's not going to be any IPCC report every 6 years. There's not going to be any data for you from satellites. There's not going to be any scientists telling you what to do or how bad it's going to get. You're just going to stick your head out one day and it's going to be too hot to breathe, and you're going to wonder how you're going to survive. Well, at that point, you need to be underground. The soil acts as a thermal barrier and a store of energy. And the temperature in your basement or underground doesn't change much over the course of a day or a night. So if you're going to survive 3 weeks of 125 degrees or whatever's coming your way, could be that. You have to plan on that. You're going to have to be underground. And that means underground means in a basement or something similar, a large space, because you're going to need a lot of space. And you have to have water, and you have to have food, and a place to sleep, and some way to cook. And you need a source of electricity for that. It can't be a generator because you won't have gasoline, and the carbon dioxide fumes will kill you anyway. And you can't go above ground, so you have to have everything down there with you. And are you set up like that? So that you can be underground for 3 weeks during a 125-degree heat wave? Because that's where you have to be. And you have to stay down there. And when you come up out of the ground and the rest of the world has just experienced 125 degrees for 3 weeks, and you come out of the ground finally and you're looking like, well, let's see what's left. You're going to find out there's nothing left. And when it's that hot, if there's a fire that gets started, like whatever, a car catches on fire somewhere stuck in traffic, then it's just going to be a firestorm. Your whole cities are going to be able to burn down, half of a city at a time. And what are buildings and houses and warehouses made out of? They're made out of wood. And what are people made out of? They're made out of fuel. And what are cars made out of? They're made out of plastic and fuel. So it's just all going to burn. Everything's going to burn. And you're going to be in your basement. You're going to be like, wow, sure glad I have a basement, and I have water and food and a place to sleep and a way to cook. And I'm going to stick my head up every few days and see what the temperature is. And 3 weeks later, you come up and you're it. You're the last. Because how many people have the scenario I just outlined? A basement with clean water, food, a way to cook, electricity. How many? A toilet? You're going to need a toilet? Do you have an up-flush toilet, a basement toilet that can take advantage of the electricity and the water supply and the sewer? Do you have that? Because if you don't, then you're above ground. And if you're above ground, you're dead. We don't need an IPCC report. We don't need the process, and we don't need the summary for policymakers, because those people are a bunch of chimps anyway, right? You just need to get to the lifeboat. And, the first iteration, the most important part of having a lifeboat for you is to be able to live underground. Your problem is not going to be sea level rise. It's not going to be, tornadoes and hurricanes, although you're going to have those too. Your problem, probably, personally, is going to be heat. And the only way to survive heat is underground. I don't mean air conditioning. You can have that too, but you're not going to have electricity. Now, I will have electricity because I have off-grid solar. So that's fine for me. But I'm not going to be above ground. I'm going to be in the basement. I'm going to turn the air conditioning off. I'm going to turn off the refrigerators. I'm going to take all the food out, put it in the basement. I'm not going to consume any electricity that isn't obviously in the basement. And I'm going to have my water, my food, my cot, my way to cook. I'm going to have my up-flush toilet in my basement. And it's not going to be any more than 80 degrees down there. And I have electricity, so I can run a fan. And when it's done, I'm going to come out like a little rabbit and have a look around. What's left? And there are so many ways that this can go wrong in a heat wave. Do I need to talk about this? I'm talking about the IPCC. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk about all the ways this can go sideways. All I'm saying is that without the substance of an IPCC report, you're not going to know what's happening until you stick your head out one day and it's too hot to breathe. I guess the meteorologist can tell you that it's going to be too hot to breathe on the day it happens, but that's a little too late for most people. You're not going to be able to get out of town on that day, on that moment when the meteorologist decides to tell you that it's going to be too hot to breathe. You're not going to be able to get out. Climate research can tell you that in the future, it's going to be too hot to breathe. Now, that's a warning you can work with, but you're not going to have that warning unless you get it from me. You're not going to have that information unless you get it from me, because you're not going to get it from the IPCC report because they're shutting down. Because they have to. Because the stuff that they're reporting now is embarrassing to the policymakers. So they're not going to have it. Starting with Donald Trump, but all the governments are going to be in on this. All the governments are going to say, oh, no, Donald Trump isn't participating in the IPCC process. Wow, that's too bad. I guess we just shouldn't have it. And they're going to be, oh, that's too bad. And they're going to go back to their parliaments and their whatever, and they're just going to feel great about that because nobody wants this. It's all bad news. And it's always telling you, you're screwing up. You need to stop burning fossil fuels. And they're like, we don't want to do that. And the IPCC report is saying, too bad, you have to stop burning fossil fuels. So if you don't want to hear someone wagging their finger at you, telling you to do something you don't want to do, you shut them down. And that's what's happening. So you're not going to have anybody, except me, coming along telling you, you need to stop burning fossil fuels. Except I'm not going to tell you that because that's not going to save you. You need to get yourself a situation where you can be underground for up to 3 weeks at a time, maybe even longer, maybe even 6 weeks at a time. Yeah, we could easily have heat. We could have heat waves that last 3 months. We could that could be a thing, which is like a nuclear war. Please notice what do they tell you? Of course, you probably never looked into this, but recommendations. In the case of a nuclear war, you have to escape the radiation. Most of the most harmful radiation actually doesn't last that long on the surface of the Earth. So you have to be underground, no dust coming in. You have to seal up any windows. I mean, if you're underground, you don't have windows, right? But you might have a door. You might have one window. You have to seal that stuff up with tape. And you have to, if you can, you have to pile dirt on any windows so the radiation doesn't come through the glass, because it can do that too. It can pierce the glass. It has a hard time piercing dirt because it gets absorbed. The gamma rays get absorbed by the dirt. But you can, you have to seal out the dust, cover up your windows with something that'll hold back radiation, and you can hunker down in your basement for how long? Okay, they tell you at least 2 weeks, and probably it's more like 6 weeks. I mean, if you really want to be safe, to escape radiation in the case of a nuclear war. After you've taped everything up and covered over the windows and hunkered down inside with enough food and water and whatever else to survive for the length of time you need to survive, that's going to be 6 weeks. Nobody can do that. And it's going to be exactly the same with the heat waves that we have coming. You're going to have to be able to be underground, pretty much self-contained. You won't even have, you'll have internet access, but there won't be much going on the internet because everyone's going to be in the same situation, right? They all have to be someplace else. And so maybe you have internet access, you have electricity and food and water, and you hunker down. And just like if there was a nuclear attack, you have to hunker down for 6 weeks or so until you come up. And then you're going to come up into an absolute riot because everyone is struggling to survive. They're fighting over the last of the water, the last of the cooling centers, the last of the fuel to run their generator so they can have an air conditioner. And it's just going to be Mad Max or worse. Mad Max was fiction. This is going to be far worse than anything you can imagine. And it doesn't matter the IPCC process is now dead. It doesn't matter that we'll never have climate data. It doesn't matter that there's not going to be a summary for policymakers. Okay? Recommendations for policymakers coming out of the IPCC report. It doesn't matter that these things are not going to happen. They weren't doing us any good, and they're not going to save you when the heat wave comes. So do I really care that the IPCC process is now dead? Not really. Wasn't doing as much good. It was kind of pretending that we're doing something, and pretending that you're doing something is really counterproductive. You're better off just to recognize that you're not doing anything, okay? You're better off just to recognize, well, we're not getting any help. And then when you realize you're not getting any help, well, then you can do something to help yourself, right? That's a start. When you give up on the government solving the problem of climate change and the government's taking climate action and you're like sitting there twiddling your fingers, well, maybe they'll get around to it someday. When you just give up on all that, then you start to do something for yourself. And what does that look like? Well, getting to a lifeboat. What does that look like? Well, in the case of heat waves, you're going to have to be underground, my friend. A large underground facility that you can populate with food and water for, better make it 6 weeks. Because even if it's only 2 or 3 weeks, when you come out from your underground and it's, the heat wave's finally gone, there's been 2-3 weeks of riots and your markets are empty and the service stations have no fuel and maybe some of them have even been blown up and most of civilization is completely collapsed. And so you're going to come out of the ground and say, well, this sucks. And then you're going to right back into your basement, wait for someone to fix it. Wait for FEMA and Donald Trump to show up and make everything right again. Well, really? You think that's going to happen? I don't think so. So how long do you have to be ready to take care of yourself after a massive heat wave that sets everything on fire, literally and figuratively? I don't know, a couple months, half a year. There was those people in Western North Carolina who got hit by the remnants of Hurricane Helene. They're still living in tents. And that was what, last summer? They're still living in tents. And I said at the time, those people are done. They will never return to their homes. They will never live in that area again. Their best option is to leave. Go live with family somewhere else, North Dakota, someplace. Okay, you got to get out of Western North Carolina. You just need to get out. And they were showing, a couple of days ago, because it was so cold, they were showing us people living in tents and mobile homes and travel trailers and in the back of their pickup truck. And they say, oh, it's so cold. These people have nothing to fall back on. It's like, yeah, they're done. They need to get out. Because after they've survived all the freezing 70 degrees below zero weather they've been getting, this summer they're going to have heat waves. And it's going to be 95 humidity and 105 degree temperature, and the wet bulb is going to be like 121, and they're just going to die in their tent without their air conditioning, without their water, and without their lifeboat. Okay, they're just going to die. They need to get out. They're not going to, because they don't understand. And the IPCC could have issued a recommendations for policymakers that says basically don't let people live in tents. Make sure everyone has air conditioning. They could have said that. That could have been part of their recommendations for policymakers, but they didn't. And the policymakers wouldn't have done it anyway. And our electric grid is too funky and old to support all that anyway. And so where you need to be is underground. Now, that would be a nice recommendation for policymakers. The IPCC could have said that. They could have said, yeah, this sucks. We're fucked. So basically, at this point, the best thing for people is just to be underground. Just just live underground. Maybe it's a basement under your house, whatever. And on good days, you can be back in your house. But on bad days, you're going to have to be underground for a couple of weeks. And since bad days where you're living underground are going to be even worse above ground, by the time you come out of your basement and you try to start moving around, it's going to be a hellscape. I mean, the IPCC could have put that in their recommendations for policymakers. Get ready for a hellscape. They didn't. So it's not there. I mean, I'll tell you that, but no one else is going to tell you that. So I don't know. The IPCC is done for, whatever. Long live the IPCC, right? It was a nice idea. Started in the 90s. It was back when we had hope and optimism, and now it's just a circus act. It's just a joke. So why have the distraction? Why have the fallback answer that, well, I don't have to do anything for myself because the governments are working on the project and they have this IPCC that issues these reports with recommendations and the governments will figure it out. They haven't. Even with the Paris Climate Accords, they didn't. But it's just this underlying narrative that they're working it. Okay, they're working it and they're going to come back to us with some ideas. someday, right? They're going to have a magic solution. They're going to take climate action and whatever. And they're not. And without the report, if the reporting process actually fails because the US is pulling out, then okay, well, that's maybe a good thing, because they weren't going to help you. They're just going to let you carry on believing that they're working the project, they're working the solutions, they're going to have something any day now. And you need to just start surviving. You need to start taking care of yourself. And when the heat comes, and I'm not worried about sea level rise, and I'm not worried about tornadoes and hurricanes, although all those things are going to happen. What I'm worried about right now is heat waves, massive heat domes that don't go away. I'm worried about a failure of the polar vortex and an incursion of the subtropical jet stream, and it's going to be a ball buster. Okay, it's going to be hot. It's going to last. It's not going away. And if it goes away for a couple of days, it comes right back with more of the same. And you need to be underground. You don't need an IPCC report to know that. You just need to know it's going to be hot, and you need to be underground. You need to figure that out. That's your lifeboat. You need to be underground with food, water, electricity. Internet access would be good. An up-flush toilet so you don't have to deal with your own waste. And then you're going to have to be there for weeks, if not months, just as if it was a nuclear war, but different. Yeah, just like a nuclear war, but different. So good luck, people. Say goodbye to the IPCC report. It was nice knowing you. Say goodbye to U.S. climate scientists. They're all going to lose their jobs now. And probably the rest of the countries of the world will follow suit, because nobody wanted this. No, this is all make-believe, and they just don't want to make believe anymore. They're all going to shut it down. The UK will shut it down. France will shut it down. They'll have their excuses, whatever. They're all going to shut it down, and you and I are on our own. We're not going to get any help. I'll help you. I'm helping you right now. Get to a lifeboat and make sure you have a place to get underground when the heat comes, and be ready to stay there for a while, and be ready to come out into a hellscape. Think about it. Think about it. Maybe I'll talk about that hellscape later. I think that's a discussion we need to have. Baby, it's a coming. Oh man, is it coming? I can hear it coming from here. I can hear it a coming. Wow.